I heard what you said about Thomas Massie. And, a lot of people think that we failed to get him reelected. But we didn't fail to get Thomas Massie reelected. The really horrifying laws of Kentucky failed to get Thomas Massie reelected. Most people don't realize that Thomas Massie in that election, they have the second worst primary laws in the United States. And so to register to vote for Thomas Massie, you had to register in December, which is why AIPAC and the Alliance didn't start spending until March. So nobody that wanted to vote for him could vote, right? So the young people didn't know this was an important thing. There was no advertisement that the election was even coming before December. So you had to register to vote for him in December. So there were only 23,000 available young voters in the entire voting pool for the state of Kentucky that could vote for Thomas Massie. We got 22,000 of them to the polls. That is an unprecedented victory, right? Like, there's never been a turnout like that of young people in a midterm primary in American history, ever, right? And so when you look at the laws of Kentucky, that deck was stacked, that cake was baked, right? There were hundreds of thousands of boomers available to vote for him and 23,000 young people, which is why I constantly stress that if young people actually want to see meaningful change in this country, you have to take part in primaries and you have to register in whatever party you want to have a bigger voice in most states in the United States. Most states don't have open primaries.
Yeah, state of Florida is obviously one of the more strict states as well, although we do have late voter registration, which is, it's better than nothing, I guess. Yeah. But the whole electoral system, which I think a lot of people have become very jaded about, a lot of people wouldn't participate to begin with, but knowing that a entity like the Zionist cause can toss over $30 million in a congressional race in Kentucky just to get their way, which again, I'm still not convinced that election was on the level. That's my opinion. We have free speech as far as I know, that we can actually see. But I think, Jen and I call our channel Revolutionary Change for a reason. I think it is inevitable. We're heading for one. And I don't think there's really any way to stop it. And Jen has always been very adamant about this idea that Trump was going to facilitate it. That so much, if not all of what he does, because it's so in your face, it's like watching a slow moving car wreck, that you can't ignore the fallacies within this system because they've just completely overtaken everything, especially when it comes to high financial crimes, of which you obviously do a lot of work in.
Sure, yeah. I definitely do. And, a lot of people, I understand being super jaded with the electoral system. I am super jaded oftentimes with the electoral system. I have huge qualms with the electoral system, but also, it's really important people recognize there are nearly 100,000 elected seats in the United States in all manner of electoral systems across the U.S. that go unopposed every year.
Yep.
Right? And so hundreds of thousands of people could turn out and just run for an office in their local government, and we could change everything. People just keep their seats because nobody challenges them. And so often you hear these they say it's a fluke story when, a 24-year-old runs against a mayor that's been mayor of their jurisdiction for 25 years and he unseats them. No, people were just waiting for somebody to step up. That's 100,000 elected seats in the United States every single electoral year. We can change massive, massive things at the state and county level. As a matter of fact, I believe that state and counties are taking back the power from the federal government. I think they're actually our best path back to being in control of so many things, because one, we've had a lot of bad Supreme Court decisions recently that have been bad interpretations, mostly because Congress has written bad laws very intentionally. They've been lazy in writing laws that are open to interpretation so that regulatory agencies that are captured by corporations are able to flex their muscles and control things that otherwise should be in the hands of the people. Right? When Congress takes lobbyist written bills that are intentionally written to be vague so that regulatory agencies they can put their people in charge of get to interpret those bills, well, the Supreme Court has to uphold them. Right? So we have bad Congress members. We have a do-nothing Congress that is not doing their job. Then the Supreme Court is coming in and saying, well, you didn't give us anything to work with. We're not doing our job. But the states, they still have a lot of authority to flex and do things that make meaningful change. And so people need to run for office, especially in their local elections. I think it's very, very important.
I think that's the only place it matters now, to be honest with you.
I don't think
it really matters. My concept is that we're headed for a degrowth situation, because at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to keep maintaining this level of energy, of consumption. We're just not. We're just not.
Yeah.
So in the places where people are going to have the best chance of being able to survive what is coming are going to be people that live in more small, sustainable communities. And so the concept of having more power locally is what is going to make people be able to survive what is coming, because we're going to have an infrastructure thing at a national level and a supply chain at a national level that is just going to be failing. It cannot sustain. So for me, it's the only answer is smaller, sustainable communities and local, I mean, mutual aid and stuff like that, but local is the only answer.
I was listening to your segment just before me where you were talking about Peter Thiel and his dialogue group getting canceled from the hotel in Ireland. And when you look at some of the things that Peter Thiel has said about the problems with democracy being voters, right? He said that very, very openly with his whole chest. The problem with democracy is voters. He said if we could gain enough control over the governments by putting our technology in there to circumvent the will of the voters by just enacting the change we want, we can take over everything. He said that very openly, very comfortably, no problems, no qualms, right? What we're seeing right now is that the Supreme Court recently just made a decision just 4 days ago, I think it was 5 days ago, where they ruled that Trump, for the first time in American history, a president has the authority to fire partisan employees at the bipartisan agencies. So like right up until now,
right,
the FTC, the SEC, we have these agencies that are always supposed to be bipartisan, which that means that there's usually 5 or 7 people at the top, right? And it's supposed to shift back and forth with the executive, who the chairperson is, while the commissioners are supposed to be split 50-50. So at the FTC, there's always one chairperson, and then there's supposed to be 2 commissioners from each party, right? And the president comes in, the new president, and they reappoint a new chairperson. But the like Trump came in, and that means Lena Khan is no longer the chairperson, which in my opinion, Lena Khan was the best thing Biden ever did.
Right? Without a doubt.
Was the worst thing Trump has done, and he's done a lot of that I don't agree with. But firing Lena Khan is number 1 on my list. Okay, but then he fired Rebecca Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya. Rebecca Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya were the Democrat-appointed commissioners. Since the founding of the FTC, there has always been 2 from the left, 2 from the right, and an executive appointee at the top. Okay, and Rebecca Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya sued in court to say he's not allowed to fire us without cause. We're supposed to be a bipartisan agency. And for the first time in American history, our Supreme Court ruled this week in a ruling that was entirely overshadowed by the birthright citizenship ruling.
Exactly.
That he absolutely can fire them, and that now the executive controls what were the bipartisan agencies, which means that every single time a president takes office, now every single office is going to shift and it's going to become entirely partisan. Well, when you look at things like the FTC and the DOJ, they're supposed to be they're our wall of security against monopolies. There are a wall of security against cartels, consolidation, antitrust behavior, exploitation of the working class. They are supposed to be our last line of defense. And their lawsuits take 10, 12, 15 years, which is why they've been bipartisan. It's supposed to change from administration to administration. The work keeps getting done. And there's a good example of this. When Trump was in his first term, he sued Google because he was not friends with the tech bros back then. He sued Google for antitrust with his FTC. And throughout all of Biden's term, it fell on Lena Khan to see that through. And she did. And she won. Okay? She finished Trump's case. And then he came back into office during the penalty phase, fired Lena, Rebecca, and Alvaro, who were fighting this case on his behalf. And then they showed up at penalty and asked for nothing and didn't break up Google after they won. They could have broken them up. They got nothing. They got a few handout, we're not going to conspire anymore. And here's $20 million out of our $26 billion we made last quarter, right? And so what's going to happen now is that these multi-decade cases that are meant to be the hedge for the working class are going to disappear at the federal level, which is a catastrophe. Simultaneously, there is another case that started with Lena Khan under Biden, where the Swifties got real mad at Live Nation. And Biden authorized them to sue Live Nation to break it up. And they started under Biden. And the Swifties were very happy. And everybody who goes to concerts was very happy about this. They started heading to court. And on the day the case was supposed to begin, 3 months ago, it came out that the DOJ and the FTC showed up, walked in. A lawyer had prepared for years to argue this case on behalf of our country and the voters. And the DOJ walked in with the FTC and said, hey, we settled with them. We're not pursuing this anymore. On the day the trial was to start, Well, 37 states had joined in that case. 37 attorney generals from bipartisan states all across the US. And they said, well, we did not settle with them and we're continuing this case. And they just won. Our states are the hedge against the consolidation that is the corporate capture of our federal government. And that is why these like international monopolies like Bayer Monsanto, Syngenta, right? JBL, who runs our meat packing, like right now, Smithfield, which sounds American, but is actually Chinese communist owned, right? That is why these companies are all fighting right now to get laws passed that take power from the states and consolidate it into the executive, because the states are still fighting and it's working, and they're actually gaining power back that they had ceded to these federal regulatory regimes. And that's where people need to be flexing their muscles, running for offices, and really pushing to make a difference right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, one of the biggest, I would say, deterrents is the two-party duopoly. However, as you know, local elections tend to be nonpartisan. And I think that that's one of the great draws, because I think a lot of times people are not even necessarily concerned per se with a third party initiative, which is nearly impossible anyway, considering how the system is constructed. However, you are not under any obligation to run for mayor, typically city council, county commission, city planner, sheriff, tax collector. There's a lot of different roles that do not require you to be in a party. You just need to serve the public. And that's always been something that I have always found perplexing. People get so caught up in, oh my God, who's going to be the president? You should be concerned about who is your local lead official, because that's where you can, I mean, you see elections all the time. They're decided by 10 votes.
Yep.
I mean, these things really do matter. And getting back to that whole ground up elections, I think is imperative. The question is, how do you know if you're electing the right people, and how do you form an even bigger coalition sort of nationwide? Because I do think this anti-Israel movement, in conjunction with whatever, despite Jen's hesitancies, what this America First movement is going to look like, because obviously it's going to have many different incarnations in terms of factions and whatnot. But this, to me, I think is an imperative, knowing how we can best coalesce. And I think based on what you're saying, it is an excellent way to coalesce, because if you're going to say anything positive about the Biden administration, Lena Khan was the best of what he had, because she really did her job and did it well. And if there is anything we know with absolute certainty about the Trump administration, it's a total freaking free-for-all of let's loot the Treasury for all it's worth for as long as we can, because we know the system isn't going to last. So we might as well get what we can while we can. So how do you ultimately see it evolving, and how do you see us better coalescing?
Well, there's a lot of things that can unite people, right? I know we're supposed to talk about data centers. I told you I wanted to talk about SOBA on this piece. When you look at some of the things that are happening right now, there are other Supreme Court cases this week that were really, really scary as well. For instance, there was a Supreme Court ruling this week straight down party lines that decided that now political parties, it's a case that's going to embolden the two-party system and build huge barriers to entry for independents right now, okay? This case was also decided 4 days ago. And what it said is it had never been looked at, that now, effective 4 days ago, the two parties are allowed to spend unlimited amounts of money to influence elections where no money was raised for that candidate. So let's say that nobody in the party wants a Democratic candidate or a GOP candidate in the state of Missouri, right? And that the two candidates that are running are both only getting ground game money. Or one of them has like AIPAC coming in and spending $30 million. And the other one is only getting $200. One of those two parties can now come in, even though no money was raised for that candidate by that party, and spend obscene amounts of money to prop up any candidate they want without the will of the voters being heard at all. That is another, and what this just did is it laid the groundwork for something that I think all of us need to be a little bit nervous about. There were two cases that are right now winding their way to the Supreme Court, one out of Maine and one out of Hawaii, that were about to undermine Citizens United. The two states passed laws stopping corporations from spending more than $7,000 making political donations, which is a power that originates in the states. That is not a federal power. It is not bestowed in the Constitution. All creation of corporate entities originates by the state where the corporate entity is created, and then in any state it's domesticated into. So this was the first law that could stand up to constitutional scrutiny that would stop corporations from buying elections. Well, as of this ruling this week, now they can give it to the parties and keep buying them.
So it
and
almost sounds
circumvent
to
those
me,
new laws.
yeah, it almost sounds to me like a situation that Jen and I are working on in Seattle with Shama Sawant's independent campaign against Adam Smith, who is the author of the conscription bill to forge the U.S. and Israel militaries together as one entity. And
Yep.
so what they have in this race right now is what we would call sort of a dummy candidate, a person who is running on the Democratic Party line, isn't really viable, but for some reason is getting hundreds of thousands of dollars when she clearly is not capable of raising that money. But if the party apparatus steps in and says, okay, we desperately do not want Shama Sawant getting to the general election, so now what we're going to do is we're going to prop up this no-name person, stick their name on the ballot, tell everyone to go vote for them, and by some miracle, she might end up getting enough votes to block Shama from getting to the general. So more or less, that's what the Supreme Court just issued as a ruling to say, yeah, you could do that if you want. You could just make up fake candidates pretty much.
Yes.
Now I want to stress that you asked what the future is for coalescing, and I want to be very clear. What we did in Kentucky is the future. I want to be very crystal clear, because people are like, oh, Massie didn't win. Massie didn't win because the law made it so he could not win. We still got 90% of young people in his district that were registered to go and vote for that man. Okay. Nice. That has never happened before. What we did was we took 36 creators to Kentucky, right? We went out there and we went to all of the rallies. We flooded the internet and we got 3.2 billion impressions in 6 days. That AIPAC can't buy 3.2 billion impressions on Fox News, and neither can the DNC or the GOP. They cannot. All right. We took people that don't take money from political parties. We paid our own way to get there, and we out-influenced their spending. We got 135 million engagements in 6 days. We kept Thomas Massie at the top as the #1 trending topic on Twitter for like 39 straight hours. Never happened before. Never happened before. We kept him in the top 10 for 9 straight days, right? Because we are what's authentic and people realize it. They also realize that creators can be bought, but it shows. You can taste authenticity. You can hear it. You can smell it. They can see it coming a mile away. And with the rise of AI, that's going to continue. The future of influencing elections for the working class, for the regular people, is going to be in us flexing our muscles to give voice where they can't buy it.